Thank you for the introduction. So, I will be here first to inspire before Martijn. I hope I can do it. I will take you a bit through the process of making the Waterworks of Money and all the questions that we run into and the people that we met along the road. As already mentioned, I'm a cartographer, and I'm a cartographer of society, so not a cartographer of roads and cities and water streams. Well, water streams in another way, but not our rivers that we see around us when we walk outside. But I'm a cartographer of the invisible and often complex structures of our society, such as the power structures that we cannot see, or laws, or flows of money. And in drawing those complex structures, I hope to provide maps from which we can start another kind of debate together, where we can unravel these systems a bit. We can also disagree on how they look, of course, but we have a starting point to talk about these complex structures and have a start a democratic debate on if this is actually still functioning for our society. In all the previous maps that I've made, whether they were on the democracy or the education system, is there something going on? Ah, okay, no problem. This is also better for the light. Oh shit! No, there. I was looking into the light. So I've made a lot of maps in the past on the education system, on democracy, on climate change, and one way or another, at some point in the project, it always came down to money, because whether there's funding for a project, that determines whether we can innovate or if we can even start a project at all. So I knew that one day I had to start this topic of money. I was looking. I was a bit afraid to start on that topic because it's a very big topic and I didn't know a lot about it. But then 3 years ago, I started. Every time when I make a map, I also make a self-portrait. This is the self-portrait that I made last year. Self-portrait, or the fantastical storehouse of financial folly. You see me in the front with all the sketches. All the, is it still? Oh, okay. So with all the sketches, all the books, because when I started this research, I was completely overwhelmed. There are so many theories, so many far reaches of this financial system, so many institutions. So I needed guides to show me around in this maze of information. So then I met Martijn Jeroen van der Linden. There he is, having a fictional conversation with himself on the one hand, with Janus Varoufakis, in his other hand, Stephanie Kelton, talking about, thinking about financial theories while having a little glass of champagne. And you also see a lot of other, and then after Martijn, I found Thomas Bolle, a financial journalist for Follow the Money, always going through the maze, trying to dig up new information, new stories, try to understand new structures. And together they engulfed me with all those books on monetary theory, on financial structures. So I had a sort of quick PhD into the money system. And you see also, maybe that's nice to point out for today, some of the other advisors that we talked to. Menno Middeldorp, you are hanging somewhere here. Theo Kokke, who we see later this afternoon. Kees Grimberg, who is sitting in the front, is also present, of course. A lot of other people. And what I also found was in this beginning of the research was that I was actually, in mapping this money system, I was stepping into a very long tradition of artists and cartographers who also mapped this system. So you see, for instance, here in the middle, a wood engraving already of the 15th century of Jost Amman. And he, well, we see it on the next slide, enlarged, this is the real thing. And he was already mapping money as water, as the fountain of trade in the middle, and showing all the different societal results, so positive and negative results of this money system that we had. And he was also giving us other important information, for instance, on the characteristics of our bankers. So your banker has to have, first of all, knowledge of language, and he has to have a high integrity. That's over there, and has to be modest. So that's a very good lecture from a couple of 100 years ago of what we want our bankers to be. And this is another artwork that for me was very inspiring. It's the Bank of England, made by Joseph Gandhi. And Joseph Gandhi was the house artist of Sir John Soane. I saw this painting in Sir John Soane in London. And it made me very emotional also because it's very beautiful. It's a beautiful painting. And what he was trying to tell us is that you have this very, very important public institution, the central bank. And the institution, well, banking will always continue. The institution will constantly change. So this is an image in which he tried to paint this building under construction, under constant construction, and also under creative destruction. So what he was trying to tell us is we voters need to tell our politicians which kind of central bank we want. The quote is from a bit later, but that's exactly what he tried to tell us. And perhaps what Jost Amman tried to tell us, Martin Wolf repeated for us, bankers are simply the most highly paid civil servants we have. So we need to talk together about this money system because it's a very important public infrastructure. And, yeah, and I think already artists of the past are trying to tell that. So with this project, we are in this tradition. Well, Martijn and Thomas, they know a lot, but not all, of course. So in the past 3 years, we spoke to all these different institutions within the money system. We made multiple sketches. We went to the Rabobank, we went to the pension funds. We talked to scientists, to activists, to Klaas Knot in the corner. We're not sure if he's really comfortable holding the drawing, but yeah, and here you see me carrying the map inside, the sketch of the map into the Rabobank to sit down together and talk about, well, is this really how the money is flowing around through our society, or do we need to iterate this drawing one more time? And this resulted in a huge wall of sketches, which kept on growing, and which we eventually also, of course, had to bring back into one smaller drawing. And as already mentioned, we used this waterfall of water, which is very logical metaphor, because we already, when we talk about money, we already talk about water. We talk about the fortunes that can evaporate. We talk about that we can freeze our assets. We talk about money flows. We talk about the trickle-down economy. It's already completely in the way we talk about it. And this was also a very important part of our project, to find a language that we can see and that we can feel and that we can understand. Because if we as voters want to tell our politicians what kind of central bank we want, we need to be also literate. We need to understand this system. We need to get out of this jargon of complex financial language, as Matt Taibbi put it, in the age of the credit default swaps and collateralized debt obligations, most of us are financial illiterates. So we need to own that language again and make it visible. After a lot of sketches, at one point the wall was so large that I still had to fit it into one small drawing. At one point we had to say, okay, this is what we are going to draw for now. We talked to so many people, now we're going to start the drawing. Which also took a while. A little over 2,000 hours later, the drawing was finished. And in order to, because I can understand that if you stand in front of it, you think, I can still not completely understand how this all works, and that's why we made 2 animations through the map, taking you through the mechanisms that influence our society. And we like to show you the second animation that we made.
Welcome back to the world of big money. My name is Caroline Kingma, and I make maps of society. This map was created with the help of financial journalist Thomas Bollen and money researcher Martijn Jeroen van der Linden. Money is depicted here as water. Just as water makes crops grow and flourish, money sets the economy in motion. In part 1 of our tour, we traced the channels of the waterworks and met the mighty institutions that operate the sluices and control the floodgates. This time, we'll show how money has flowed through the waterworks since the 2008 financial crisis and what that means for society. You don't find out who's swimming naked until the tide goes out. Those are the words of Warren Buffett, one of the richest people in the world. When the money recedes, it becomes clear who's taken on too much risk. Those playing the market with borrowed money get into trouble when share prices fall. Their investments generate less income and they can no longer pay their debts. They're forced to sell at a time when buyers are scarce. That only exacerbates the downward spiral and the water recedes further. Shortfalls on the financial markets then spread to the banks as the value of outstanding loans plummets. It soon becomes clear how unstable the waterworks are. Because we depend on the banks for our savings and payment transactions, banks are essential. That's why they're bailed out with taxpayer money time and again. When the 2008 crisis hit, the US Treasury spent more than $400 billion on bailouts, while states in Europe pumped 1.6 trillion euros into the financial system. And it didn't stop there. The central banks also came to the rescue. Central banks around the world, like the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve in the US, protect the waterworks and guard water levels. Sufficient money flowing through the economy keeps prices stable. If the amount in circulation quickly goes up, so will prices, and you'll get less bread or milk for your money. If water levels drop, it's even more dangerous. That can lead to a drop in prices or deflation, the opposite of inflation. That's what happened in the 1930s during the Great Depression. When stock markets crashed, banks stopped giving out loans. And because money creation in our system goes hand in hand with extending credit, the amount of money out there shrank. Money simply stopped flowing and whole sections of the waterworks went dry. Consumer spending stalled, businesses failed, and millions of people fell into poverty. The social unrest that followed fed the rise in fascism. During the 2008 credit crunch and the ensuing recession, economists feared that low inflation would morph into deflation and dry up the waterworks. Europeans feared the euro currency would not survive. To avert disaster, The central bankers wanted to bring inflation up to 2% at all costs. "Whatever it takes," said Mario Draghi, then president of the European Central Bank. Central banks set their money supply channels for commercial banks wide open. First, they reduced borrowing costs for banks by lowering interest rates. Then, they created new money and used it to buy up massive amounts of the government bonds and business loans held by banks and other financial institutions. That's how the financial sector got hooked up to an intravenous drip of public money. This combination of lowering interest rates and buying assets from banks created excess liquidity for the banks. The banks then opened their floodgates and provided low-cost mortgages, driving up home prices. They also flooded financial markets with cheap credit. The rising water levels pushed up the prices of financial investments. By 2020, share prices had risen, on average, by 3 to 4 times what they'd been in 2008. Shareholders in multinationals gained the most. Since 2016, the European Central Bank has bought up 350 billion euros worth of corporate bonds. Yet only big business met the criteria. And so, big oil, the car industry, tobacco and arms manufacturers all got their hands on dirt-cheap public money. Take the French luxury goods conglomerate Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy. LVMH was happy to borrow from the central bank while paying shareholders billions in dividends. The company then bought back its own shares, driving the price even higher, and took over competitors like jeweler Tiffany & Co. Hedge fund billionaire Ray Dalio openly warned of the consequences. He pointed out that while money is essentially free for those who already have money and creditworthiness, it's essentially unavailable to those who don't. This contributes, he explained, to the widening wealth gap, opportunity gap, and political divides we see today. In a single year, the chair and CEO of LVMH, Bernard Arnault, saw his net worth go from $75 billion to $195 billion, passing Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos in 2021 to become the richest man on Earth. It was trickle-down economics all over again. The idea that if you flood big banks and corporations with liquidity, money will somehow find its way down to the rest of society. But according to Nobel-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz, that only happens in economic models, and he questioned the rationale behind such a policy. Every year, bankers at the world's leading central banks would predict inflation of 2%. And every year, inflation fell short until 2021. Though the floodgates stayed open for years and banks were flush with money, it failed to reach ordinary people. While researching this map, I was amazed to find out that society has grown only more dependent on the parties that caused the 2008 financial crisis. Why is it, I wondered, that even channels for public money pass through the banks? Surely, a bank's profit motives are not always in line with the public interest. Thousands of bankers and lobbyists have ready access to politicians and regulators. They help draft the legislation meant to fortify the existing waterworks and make it safer. The latest rulebook for banks worldwide is more than 2 million words long. That's 3 times as long as the Bible. But has it helped? Security measures have been tightened. Banks are now required to have more capital on hand, but only marginally more, in the single digits instead of, say, 20 or 30% of their balance sheet. The burden of the complex regulations discourages new banks from joining the ranks. Only institutions with an army of lawyers and risk managers are equipped to tackle the long checklists. More than ever, a handful of big banks dominate the market. And to top it all off, banks are still allowed to sell all kinds of financial products comparable to the ones that set off the crisis. Some are kept off the main books and instead grouped under separate legal entities that aren't subject to banking regulations. These shadow banks, which fall outside the purview of regulators, have outpaced the growth of the regulated sector and now control half of the world's financial assets. Commercial banks remain essential for payments and savings. They know they won't be allowed to fail, and that encourages them to take more risks. The risks are still borne by all of us, as the 2023 bailouts demonstrate, while any profits are for the banks and their shareholders. Through petitions and public debate, activists and scholars have tried to put reform of the financial sector on the political agenda. Why doesn't every community have a viable public alternative to commercial banks? We keep propping up the current system, but why not do more, closing off the leaky channels and forging new ones? In many places, the world seemed open to banking reform and creating a safe public alternative for our savings. Politicians would graciously accept the big reports and then shelve them forever. That all parts of our financial system are profoundly interlinked became even clearer to me when I explored another part of the Waterworks, our pensions and retirement funds. In my country of the Netherlands, most employees are required to put part of their paycheck into a pension fund. Up until the 1980s, that money was used to make direct investments in society, like building affordable homes and infrastructure. One person's savings helped create opportunities for others, and the money remained in the national economy. But the growth in financial markets changed things. Today's pension funds invest far less in the employee's own country. Instead, they outsource such choices to asset managers who invest all over the world. It works like this. To bring in returns of 6 or 7%, asset managers invest money in a variety of places, with a range of risk profiles and rates of return. The low interest rate policy of central banks meant that government bonds and low-risk corporate loans generated lower returns. To hit 6 or 7%, pension funds started taking greater risks, and the share of different investments in their portfolios has shifted. Less money now goes to government bonds, and more goes to stocks. A growing portion of the money in pension funds races along the financial channels between markets in Amsterdam, New York, London, and Shanghai, in search of the highest returns. Thanks to these pension funds, asset management firms like BlackRock and Vanguard have grown into power players who control trillions of dollars in assets. Just like the banks before them, they're now too big to fail, and they're regularly hired to consult for the central banks. Conflicts of interest loom as these consultants advise on policy that has direct ramifications for their own investment portfolios. Private equity firms have also become more important in the management of our pension funds. They buy up companies all over the world, push through layoffs, carve out viable business units, then turn around and sell them off for a profit. Drained of assets, the stripped-down companies are left saddled with debt. That's why private equity firms are likened to vultures and vampires. Using middlemen like Blackstone, the world's largest private equity firm, our pension funds also invest in buying up great numbers of homes in our cities, speculating on flipping them or renting them out. A teacher or nurse required to pay into those same pension funds often can't afford to buy a home in the city where they work and is stuck instead paying ever higher rent. The returns on investment have to come from somewhere. One person's pension is covered by the higher housing costs coughed up by the other contributors. Meanwhile, Blackstone CEO Stephen Schwarzman collected pay and dividends in 2021 and again in 2022 of more than $1 billion. The Netherlands is purported to have one of the best pension systems in the world. But in the course of this project, I've started to wonder, best for whom? Who actually benefits? For years, many people's pensions weren't adjusted for inflation. And all the while, a long chain of financial middlemen proceed to skim off generous bonuses and management fees. In 2020, these costs first topped 10 billion euros. That's more than a quarter of the 35 billion paid out to Dutch pensioners in that same year. In 2022, inflation in Europe and the US soared. Central banks are no longer trying to raise the water level. Instead, there's too much money in circulation. But the central banks can't directly control how much money is flowing through society, or how much interest people earn on their savings. They again rely on indirect channels that run via the commercial banks. Those banks ultimately set rates for their customers. Today, the central banks are trying to fight inflation by cooling down the economy. Wouldn't it be more effective to take some money away where it's available in excess, at the top of society? Our monetary system exacerbates inequality and doesn't do a good job of financing the transition to a sustainable economy. It can't stay afloat without safety nets, relief packages, and continual injections of public funds. We can keep it going as is, or we can choose to change how the system works. What the Waterworks looks like is ultimately a political choice. Our choice. With some basic changes to taxation, we can mitigate extreme inequality. Work is currently taxed more heavily than wealth, which means 90% of people pay a far greater share of their income in taxes than the richest 10%. On top of that, the richest 1% and multinationals make use of financial engineering and special deals with the tax authorities instead of paying their fair share. Taxation is meant to fund collective needs and to help redistribute money, correcting excesses. But taxes don't address the root cause, flaws in how that money is distributed in the first place. To make the flow of money more just and equitable, we need to retrofit the Waterworks and redesign its architecture. Take, for instance, two channels that the central bank could use to regulate water levels, without relying on commercial banks. One channel already exists and runs between the central bank and the government. It's been sealed off for fear of politicians tapping into the central bank's money source to benefit themselves. Of course it's important that no one can just print money to win souls for the next election. But isn't it just as important that unelected technocrats aren't able to transfer wealth or disrupt the market using new money? Wouldn't it have been better to take those trillions created for the financial sector and have invested the money in housing, education, and a sustainable future instead? A second channel between the central bank and the people that could be used to influence the amount of money out there is helicopter money. The central bank could give all of us equal individual grants, essentially letting money rain down over society. Because wouldn't it be more effective to put money directly into the hands of the people, instead of giving it all to big banks and hoping it trickles down? The helicopter is now tied down, but a new form of money is being developed that could open up this channel: central bank digital currency. It could give people more direct access to their central bank, and that would make it possible to make structural improvements to the Waterworks. Whether we can seize this opportunity will depend on how the new currency is designed. We have some decisions to make, because only if people let their voices be heard does the democratic process start rolling. What do we want to water, and what can run dry? Which channels do we need to close off? And what new channels and sluices do we need to forge? In the time to come, we'll draft new architectures for the Waterworks and scout out future scenarios. How we set up our monetary system is a public affair. The future of our money is too important to leave in the hands of unelected bankers.
Okay. Well, I'm Thomas Bollen, the third project partner of the Waterworks. this was our second animation. So if it went a little quick, just watch the first one online, because this is the second course. It goes quite deep, and now when I look back at it, I'm like, whoa, there's a lot of content in there. So what we will do is now take you through some of the mechanisms that were in the video that we identified. And it's important to note that we put inequality central to the drawing. So we wanted to take this problem of growing inequality and see where the financial system influences this problem. And here on the slide you see some titles of news articles of just this month, just to show you that it's a very current problem and that the design of the current system has its losers and winners. Clearly, these are the losers. These are the people who are living in poverty, and just here in the Netherlands, almost 1 million people, if nothing changes, will be living in poverty next year. Just note that. And especially with inflation rising, it's again these people who bear the burden. On the other side, we have the winners. Corporate profits have soared. They were also a cause of inflation. And again, bank profits are really high, also due to the rising interest rates, which are not rising on your bank account so quickly as for the banks on their central bank reserves. Now, we'll take you through 6 of the mechanisms that we identified during this project as really exemplary of what happens in our financial system which exacerbates inequality. The first one is the access to liquidity. Private banks, commercial banks, they create most of the money in our society, all the digital money. But when you go to a bank, it really matters where you stand in society. So if you're at the top, you have property, you have money already, or you are a big corporation, it's easy to get a loan, and you often pay a low interest rate. But if you don't have any property, you don't have a lot of money yet, you will not get a loan at all, or you pay a lot for the loan you get. So clearly this is a mechanism which exacerbates the already existing inequality further. Here you see it in the map as well. So that's where we put the nice slogans of the banks. Doing God's work is Martijn's favorite. And here you see the access to these different, to the banks from the different layers in society. And you see the check, the further you go down in society, the credit worthiness check is heavier than at the top of society.
Yes, and the second one, that was really well explained, I think, in the video. So in the banking system, again and again, the profits are private, and in case of a crisis, the losses are made public. And that is, as explained in the video, because banks fulfill such an important function in society. So they are responsible for money creation, and for the payment system. And here you see, indeed, they make a new infuse to save the banks. So this is happening again and again, and this leads to inequality.
Then the ineffective monetary instruments.
Yeah, that was also in the video. So with the current monetary policy instruments, so the instruments that the central bank is using. So in the drawing we see 4 pipelines, or 4 channels. 2 are functioning. So the functioning ones are the pipeline to the commercial banks, and the channel to financial markets. But there is no direct link between the central bank and the government, and between the central bank and the citizens. So we are always independent, in the case of monetary policy, of financial markets and commercial banks.
Then we have the dominance of financial gains. So in the end, for a lot of corporations and players, financial institutions in the system, in the end, what matters most is financial gains. And they come first, and then there are the secondary motives like improving society or greening the economy, making the economy more sustainable. of course, we see that at the top of the tower with the corporations and the banks and their shareholder meetings, because it's the structure. The shareholders can vote, and in the last 10 years, we saw that buying back your own shares and paying out more dividends has been very popular, and 2020 and 2021 were record years for both dividends and for buying back your own shares, which was in the video. Then the share price goes up even further. Another part that was also in the video were the pension funds. So we save a lot of money here in the Netherlands, and it goes through the financial channels to all these places in the markets, to the private equity firms, and this has repercussions for society. Because in the end, the people who live in these houses, they will have to pay more rent, or they cannot afford their own home anymore. And what is a very specific detail is that you're contributing to your pension fund, often mandatory here in the Netherlands. And then that same pension fund might buy up houses in the city where you live, and that's contributing to your own problems. So it's really something that we should rethink. Is this what we want to achieve with the system?
Yes, and we discussed this map with a lot of people. So always when you talk about inequality, most people mention immediately the tax system. And of course, the tax system is important. You can change the tax system that you stimulate or decrease inequality. So that is indeed possible. Within the current system, you see also how those mechanisms function together. So rich people, for instance, yacht-backed loans. So what rich people do, so you have a lot of shares and you want to buy a big yacht. You don't sell your shares because then you have to pay taxes, but you give your shares as collateral to a bank. Then you get new bank money and you buy that yacht. So those constructs are much more accessible for the people at the top. So most of us will not be able to do that. But if you are rich, you can have you can make use of those kind of constructs. And this is why also the current tax system, how it is organized, also stimulates on increasing inequality.
Yes, and the last problem that we identified is a little softer. It's not a technical problem. It's a problem of responsibility and accountability. Because this is such a complex system, and you have so many players in the system. You have the private institutions, you have the government, and it's always a question, who needs to solve this problem, and who's gonna move first? And this creates an environment where it's much easier to say somebody else needs to move first, and then I will do something different as well, than to say this is my responsibility and I will be the one changing. And we see that, for example, most banks, they have slogans like growing a better world together or investing in future banking for better generations to come. But when it comes down to the bottom line, they still invest in activities that don't fit this profile. If it's still profitable and it's legal, then why not? And the excuse is often, if we don't do it, one of our competitors will do it. They will become bigger, we will become smaller, so we have to do it. And then you have to point to the government and say the government needs to change all the rules, but then Martijn has some experience on that as well, that it's very difficult to get these changes.
Yeah, I will explain it later in my lecture.
Okay, that's great. So we save this one for later. Bottom line, these are just 6 mechanisms that we'd identified. Of course, there are many more aspects of these financial systems which you can point out. But it's very important to see that they are one big system. All these different parts, they function together. And we really have to think about the system as a whole and see the opportunities where we can improve it. And that is also what Martijn will continue his talk about. So Martijn, I'll give you the floor.
No, we go to the future scenarios. That's important. No.
We're going to do the future scenarios first. Okay, but then Carlijn needs to come on stage as well. So, before we keep the tension building for your big speech, Martijn, so we have developed 3 scenarios to look further into the future. So to say we need to change the system, it's very difficult to grasp this, because where do you start? And we can always see these little obstacles, so we don't move. So thanks to the great skill of Carlijn, we have imagined 3 possible futures. And they can be seen as a utopia, but for other people they will be dystopian. So it's really different sort of future. But the goal of doing this is just thinking without obstacles, imagining a different future. So that's what we did. And I will start with this first world. So this is the valley of debt-free money. And here in the front of this map, there we see the ruins of the old world. And the people who moved to this valley of debt-free money, they said, well, it's really a problem that we put money and debt on the same balance sheet. We should separate these 2 things because it creates instability in our system, and that requires us to prop up the system all the time. And it's really problematic. So we should separate public and private better in our new world. So what they did is start a public ledger and have a monetary authority manage this system. This is the public part of the money system. If society needs more money, if inflation is too low, we need more money for the economy to thrive, then the central monetary authority will create more money. It will measure this through the inflation monitor, and it will flow through society to keep the economy going. If there's too much liquidity and people don't invest their money at the right places, they levy an excess liquidity tax to take money out of the system again. And because the public part of this system, the money system, now function in this manner, we can have a true, liberal, free market of financial intermediation. This is where people consciously invest their money. So if you have money that you don't need right now, you invest it with a party. You know, you take some risk, you get some return for it. It can go wrong, you can lose some money, but you know where your money is and what you're doing with it, and you also know what you are investing in. And there's also, here you see it on the right-hand side, a financial transaction tax being levied to encourage long-term investment instead of the short-term investment and trading that we see right now, and to create a more prosperous economy for all.
Is it working? Ah, okay. Agora of democratic money. The citizens of the Agora of democratic money wanted to take it a bit further than the citizens of the Valley of Debt-Free Money. They achieved, finally, that to really democratize money, power, and ownership. In the front of the map, you see the ruin of the mega corporations and the mega banks. You see the end of shareholder capitalism. In front, you see the graveyards of all these super large corporations, which became so large that they became even more powerful than the state. This had to end in the Agora of democratic money. You see the bankers' books with the black holes, which they use to fill our society with problematic debts. And a little bit outside of the screen, you see a plate, Rest in Pieces, in honor of the dissolution of corporate power. Here, they managed to arrange it in a completely different way. All the ownership of all the companies was now democratized. So every employee had a share, and these shares were non-tradable. And also we managed to govern all our important infrastructures and institutions as a collective. So in the center, you see the money system. Together in the Agora, in the public debates, we determine if there's enough money going around or if we need to create more money. And if we need to create more money, how will we spend it? How will we distribute it? Is it a basic income, or maybe we need to stimulate certain parts of the society? And because the shares are now non-tradable, large parts of the financial sector became an unused ruin. You see the ruins of the financial markets. And this is a very popular destination for a Sunday afternoon walk, because the financial markets were for so many years flooded with liquidity that it became this fantastic biodiversity park.
Thank you, Carlijn. Can I have it? Thank you. And then finally, so I will bring you to the Republic of 1,000 coins. So this is really where you should be. The best place. So according to the people living here, there is one big mistake on our continent, and that's central power, central government power. And it is the governments that is always rescuing the banks, and there is one currency to rule all people. So on this continent, there is a diversity of currencies. So you see there Friedrich von Hayek. He's very famous in this continent. He wrote a book in 1978, The Denationalization of Money, and they put it here into practice. So there is a currency exchange. So there's a diversity of private currencies. You can just choose yourself which currency you want to use. And they are seen never hodl. That's also very important for the students of the blockchain minor and the minor trading digital and financial assets. Hold on for dear life. It was a mistake of the past. In this continent, the main philosophy is always diversify. And here you see also something. It's a statue. Satoshi Nakamoto, the founder of Bitcoin. He's a big inspirator in this continent. He's very famous. People go there to see him. And what you also see when you go there, you have to come on the national holiday, the end of central banking day. Here's a big statue. Alan Greenspan, one of the most famous central bankers of our continent. On their national holiday, they take the statue outside, and all people are dressed as a central banker. So they have all gray suits, white shirts, and very boring ties. And that's how they celebrate the end of Central Banking Day. And at the beginning of the conference, Sigrid Kaag said, all central bankers are the same. And this is what is visualized here. So this diversity brings a lot of flourishing. So there are a lot of different communities that use different coins to stimulate, for instance, wind energy. And there's a lot of diversity. And so what we want to do with those three scenarios is to stimulate or encourage thinking about different future scenarios. And that's what we did with a lot of different groups last days, and what we will continue to do. So thanks for your attention.